Psychiatry Boot Camp. I am joined today by Dr. Justin Romano. We're going to talk about cell phone use and screen time. Dr. Romano was a co-resident of mine at Creighton. You were 3 years ahead of me. I think 2 years ahead of me. Child and adolescent psychiatrist, has his own podcast, the Millennial Mental Health Channel. And I will say that if it wasn't for Dr. Romano having his podcast, I am certain that Psychiatry Boot Camp would not exist. So in many ways, we have him blazing the trail of Creighton podcasting to thank for this show. Dr. Romano, I will ask you to introduce yourself further to our audience.
So yes, I am Dr. Justin Romano. I am originally from Cheyenne, Wyoming. I'm actually currently working in Cheyenne, Wyoming as an outpatient child and adolescent psychiatrist. I have a 3-year-old boy. I've got another child on the way. He should be here in less than 2 weeks. So that's about it. That's my life updates.
Okay, so nothing too exciting going on for you then, sounds like?
No.
I'm going to start by what got you interested in this topic, because cell phone use and screens do not show up in the DSM, right? So when we're in residency, we're really not learning, if we're being honest, at least formally, anything about these. We're not really tested on this on our psychiatry board examination. So this has become sort of a pet project for you, or a special interest for you. Did you have a formative experience that got you interested in this topic, or what kind of put it on your radar?
Well, basically, I couldn't ignore this topic any longer because it just seemed like so many of the people that I was working with, so many of the families I was working with, kept bringing it up as a problem. I remember doing my inpatient child and adolescent psychiatry rotation in Omaha, Nebraska, and we had multiple people coming into the inpatient psychiatry, and the chief complaint being, took cell phone away, threatened to kill themselves, like had suicidal ideation after cell phone taken away. So that was kind of when I first really started to think like, okay, like, should I look into this more? Is this a thing? So that's when I volunteered. I did that TED Talk, the TEDx talk for TEDx Omaha in 2022, and decided, hey, I think this is kind of the most important thing impacting young people, which is really when I started to dive into some of the research and literature, which overall is pretty limited in terms of what's actually out there. Now, actually, over the past couple of years, that information and that base of information has expanded, so that's good. But yes, that's about how I got started in this topic.
We trained on the same inpatient unit, and one of the things that I most remember from my 2 months of doing inpatient child and adolescent psychiatry is I felt like I would go home and I would ask myself, would this unit still exist if Snapchat didn't exist? Like, it felt like every history that I took, Snapchat had something to do with it. And the stressors that these kids were dealing with in terms of things that might have lifelong ramifications. You know, one impulsive mistake that many people have made for millennia is now on the internet. It really broke my heart. And so I'm really excited to be talking to you about this today. Is this a topic that is specifically found, or that we need to worry about particularly in children? Is it children and adults? Is it affecting just some children, all of our children? How widespread is problematic technology use?
So I would say this affects everyone in the United States because cell phones are specifically designed to be addictive. I don't know if you've seen the documentary, The Social Dilemma, but it kind of goes into these psychologists that worked with social media companies to try and make these social media apps as addictive as possible for people. But yes, I think it is affecting everyone. I worry the most about children just because their frontal lobes are not fully developed and they have a little bit harder of a time resisting a lot of social media and the allures of social media. Plus, I'm really worried about brain development in young people, because once your brain's fully developed, it's a little bit less of a problem. But for young people who are in the process of developing their brains and their patterns for their lifelong journey, social media can really change those and impact them. So I think it affects everyone. To kind of give you some statistics, the 98% of adults own a cell phone. This is according to the Mobile Fact Sheet from 2025. And dependence rates vary greatly, but are recorded as high as about 51.2% in one recent study of over 5,000 subjects. And this was Al-Wafi et al. In 2022.
So you see this as a developmental problem. One of the issues is that as children's very plastic brains are developing, we're introducing this new variable, this really important variable of maybe screen dependence, cell phone dependence, How does that alter the development of their brain? And you don't need to speak too neuroanatomically about this, but just generally speaking, what do you mean when you say you're worried about the development of their brain?
I always like to compare this to other forms of behavioral addiction, kind of like gambling. So if you have an addiction at a young age or develop an addiction at a young age, well before your brain is fully developed, which, as we know, for men is mid 20s, girls is probably early 20s, uh, it really predisposes you to a lot of those dopamine releases in your reward pathway and can make addiction more of a significant problem throughout the entire rest of your life. So I really worry about children becoming dependent on that constant dopamine boost that they get from social media and screens that prepares them and programs their brain. It's a very hard thing to unprogram over time if it's happening while your brain is developing. So that's the thing I worry about the most, is that it's changing the way the brain is actually functioning, changing the way that dopamine is released, and changing that craving for that dopamine release that screens provide.
When you're worrying about this, you mentioned social media and you mentioned screens. Let's kind of define how wide of a conversation we're going to have here. Are you talking pretty strictly about our common social media apps? I think of Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. And I also, when I think about problems with screens, I think about that artificial light kind of flooding into your brain, especially at hours when you usually wouldn't have that much arousal and affecting your circadian rhythm, et cetera, getting a lot of rewards. So definitely cell phone screens, probably tablet screens for children as well, social media apps. Where else does this sort of reward center get hijacked by technology?
I think all of those things that you mentioned, yes, for the younger kids in my clinic, especially, I see that mostly the younger kids are on YouTube all the time. And I can't tell you how many families say, like, we really had to cut down or eliminate YouTube because the longer they were on it, the more behavior got out of control, the impulse control got worse. Then, when you start getting a little bit older, 13 and older, that's when social media really starts to play. I always make my teenagers in my office during new intakes actually pull up their screen time apps and
I
give
love
me
that.
their. I know. It's surprising too how many are like totally okay with it. Like I thought they would be a little bit more against it, but most of them are like, yeah, let's do it. Let's check it out. I've got young women who are doing 6 to 8 hours of TikTok per day on average. So that's a huge amount of time that is going into looking at one specific app. Yeah, I'm worried about, especially for young men, gambling apps. And I know this is moving into probably a little bit more 18 plus where it is more legal. But I saw a study recently that showed that half of young men age 18 to 25 are using gambling apps currently. So I really worry about a lot of that. I worry a lot about a lot of shopping things too. I think that sometimes people can get into a lot of problems. Video games are a huge issue for young people. And I know, according to the ABCD study, the Adolescent Brain and Cognitive Development Study, which we will, I'm sure, discuss a lot more, that for young men, particularly, video games is kind of the dominant form of addiction for screens in young men. So multiple different things. And that's why I think we need to lump it together in terms of screens as a whole. I know that when I was first researching this topic, there was a lot of argument online about like, oh, well, how do we define this? What is it? What are we really looking at? And there was more arguing over what actually the definitions were going to be instead of just wondering if this was actually bad for
Yeah, a
people
little
overall.
misdirection. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's important to understand that the smartphone, the tablet is infinite in terms of the types of things that can be addictive. I know in my TED talk, I said, like, you're walking around with an addiction ticking time bomb in your pocket because you've got social media, you've got YouTube, you've got shopping, you've got porn, you've got YouTube, you've got all of these different things that you could potentially get an addiction to on one device.
Yeah, I like that we're talking about this so clinically and I think a little bit commonsensically. I think it's easy to get buried in defining terms on this topic or buried in the statistics. And to be clear, the statistics are grave and they're really impressive. But I think, your clinical experience is going to be more useful to our listeners. When I think about, I agree with you. We're going to have a whole episode on internet gambling disorder, so I don't want to go too far into that. but internet gambling just came to Missouri actually this year, and so I signed up for it and I took the free like 600 free bet dollars, and I sort of saw it as a little. I tried to make it a science experiment with an N of one, and I said, I know that mathematically this is the stupidest possible thing that I can do, and so I will not. I was pretty confident that I would not develop a behavioral addiction to it. I have been really impressed by how good these people are at manipulating my brain. It's shocking. I mean, this games I don't even like. I would wake my son up in the morning and feed him a bottle at 7 a.m., right? And I'm playing with this free money. And so I'm betting on these English Premier League games. And I'm like, this is fun. This is an experiment. And then the next weekend, I thought, wait, I don't get to bet on English Premier League games this morning. I don't even care about the English Premier League. And I went into this eyes wide open. So just imagine if you just thought, I'm just going to dabble in this. This seems like fun. It seems like it's free. I could just feel, there are very few things in life that feel this way. And I could just feel my neural pathways changing based on the notifications that I was getting, the free money that I was getting, et cetera. It's on every billboard in the city of St. Louis right now.
Yeah.
And then when I think about the video games, that's a similar experience as well. I've had some experience with that. And the colors, the sounds, right? If you think of some of our most common games that young boys will play, they're going around the map looking for these different items that they need. And so where they find the items are going to give off a very specific sound. And opening that chest is going to give your brain that you found it and you're going to get this big gold prize. And then you're going to go use it. And it's extremely satisfying and it can keep you in the chair for an absurd amount of time.
Yeah. And when I ask young people what are their favorite video games, 9 times out of 10, it is always Roblox, it is Fortnite, it is Minecraft. It is the ones that are free to download with a lot of in-app purchases. I know Minecraft's probably the better of the three, but most of the time it is Roblox. And I've had multiple families tell me that they've had their kids take their credit cards and plug their credit card information into Roblox and buy all these this fake currency on there. It really can become a huge problem for young people and families, and hundreds, if not thousands of dollars worth of charges on a lot of these things because kids don't really understand the full context of it, but they just crave those rewards in those games and they will do whatever they have to do to get them.
There's a perennial story about college students, I feel like, who don't know what credit cards are either. And their parents say, here's your emergency card. And they run up the bill because they think, oh, this is free money. And these people are 18. Imagine a 7-year-old who this is really, in some ways, the most important part of their day is getting on this and doing what they really like to do. This is what they've been looking forward to all day. You just can't blame them that they're not going to see those consequences. And I think it's led to some really bad outcomes. I think I spoke about that really pretty anecdotally. So now let's kind of take the opposite approach and pull the lens back a little bit and speak societally. What do you think are some negative consequences of screen time that we're seeing on a societal level?
I think so many things are changing from a societal level. If you look at the statistics on Gen Z in particular, they're not spending as much time in person as previous generations did. Gen Z is having less sex than any generation in previous generations in history. And the Gen Z is drinking and socializing a whole lot less than any other previous generation too. So I think that from a societal level, we're seeing that people are on their phones so much that they are choosing to stay in and be on their phones instead of actually being out and doing social things. One of the things that a couple of different studies have shown is that the more time you spend on your phone tends to lead to more feelings of loneliness. So I think that this is actually probably the loneliest generation in history because they are alone so much of their time. I talk to so many parents who say, man, my kid just sits in their room all day on their phone, never comes out, doesn't talk to me, they don't come out to spend time with their friends. And so, yeah, from that big picture societal level, we're seeing huge changes in the trends of what young people are doing, especially compared to someone like a Gen X generation, the latchkey generation, who could pretty much do anything and they're outside on their bikes all the time. Just to follow up on that point specifically, that we're seeing that this generation is much more sedentary than previous generations. They're not exercising, they're not moving as much because they're mostly just inside. I know that with cannabis use, we have cannabis amotivation syndrome. And I really do think that there is a technology amotivation syndrome as well. That if you're on your phone, if you're on the social media all the time, you don't have much drive to do anything else. Some of my patients who I see that have 8+ hours of screen time per day, I'll ask them about basic questions about their lives. What do you like to do? What are you interested in? And they have nothing. They have nothing. You ask them like, hey, do you want to learn how to play an instrument? Are you interested in movies, music, all this stuff? All they do is social media all day, every day, and they just have nothing else going on in their lives.
Yeah, I think these are also things that I've seen clinically. When I think about how that ties in with other kind of macro level problems that we're having, there's been a lot of press about deaths of despair. The life expectancy in the United States went down for the first time in a long time, sort of as a result, thought to be as a result of the opioid epidemic and these deaths of despair. And these are by and large not children. And now you're telling us that the loneliest generation yet actually is the generation that is currently coming of age. So I think that's pretty abjectly terrifying. And I also think of studies of older adults and what is important for older adults in terms of maintaining connection with their community and having relationships. And I think our studies have found, I'll have to try to link one of these in the episode notes, that it really is not as important how many friends you have. The number doesn't matter as much as having a few quality relationships. And when I think of what time on social media does, to me, for the most part, it's not deepening a few solid relationships. I mean, in some ways, I think it probably cheapens some of my deeper relationships because I think of some people that are really important in my life and our relationship now, and this is mostly a result of distance, so I guess it's not an exact comparison, is we send each other a reel every now and then, and that's really become our relationship. But I think when you're connecting with people that you can't physically be around, just by necessity, that's going to be a much less intimate relationship. And you could say liking a friend's post on social media is engaging in that relationship, but I don't think you could make an argument that that's engaging very deeply in that relationship.
Yeah, and that's something I tell my young patients all the time is that your online, your screen relationships are much more superficial and tend to lead to more loneliness. So you have to push back a little bit and you have to try and focus on those in-person relationships because those are what actually make you feel better. Those are what actually make you feel connected to other people. I know my co-host, Eddie Carrillo, he brings up one study that demonstrated that the more connected you are to your school, in terms of the people, the academics, the extracurriculars, the activities, the sports, the more successful you will be at high school. And I think that's why so many young people are struggling is because they're trying to rely on social media and their phones to give them that sense of connection instead of actually fostering in-person, real-world connections.
Other than this sort of loneliness that is brought on by substituting in person human interaction for a screen, are there any other societal level problems that you're tracking?
Me personally, trying to think of other big changes. I think the one that I see, especially because I work with a lot of young kids, is emotional regulation. That young kids need a lot of social interactions to learn how to deal with the frustrations in life. And I don't have much to compare this to, and I have a selection bias too, because I work with the kids who need a psychiatrist. But it seems like destroying classrooms for elementary school kids is commonplace now.
What?
Like, this never happened when I was a kid, but
Like
I work with,
violence?
yes, like ripping things off the wall, throwing chairs, flipping desks. I can't tell you how many times I've worked with young people who they say, yeah, the class had to be evacuated because some kid was having a meltdown or a tantrum. This is commonplace. And I think if you would talk to any teacher in the United States, they would say this is happening at probably every school in the country. And so the theory behind this is that we learn emotional regulation through human interactions. And what kids are getting these days from a very young age is screens. So even if you get a 2-year-old who gets 2 hours of screen time per day, that's 2 hours every single day that's getting taken away from their social interactions, from their emotional regulation time. So they don't know how to deal with hard emotions. They just know that, hey, I'm feeling something, I'm going to go back to my screen. And if they don't have that screen, they don't have any emotional control. And so I think what we're seeing, especially in the post-COVID world, after kids just got inundated with screens, is that kids these days have much less emotional control than they did in the past.
I think that example brings it back to how this is so similar to a substance use disorder. A conversation that we had on the consult service a few weeks ago was a patient who was very effectively dysregulated on the consult service. And our team was discussing, kind of what the diagnosis was or what the pathophysiology was. And there were personality disorder diagnoses that were kind of thrown out there. A couple of the students thought maybe it was going to be a psychotic disorder type situation because the behavior was really so out of proportion to the stressor. You could probably call it irrational. And my opinion was essentially that this is what substance use disorder looks like, right? Because this is why people use substances, is they get affectively dysregulated, and then they will turn to alcohol, cannabis, methamphetamine, cocaine to cope with those feelings, right? This would be that avoidance criterion in PTSD. So you can just immediately shut those feelings down. They no longer flood your senses. And screens, really, especially video games, social media, things that are going to give you those quick hits of joy, they really operate in a very similar way, I think, in terms of a psychological perspective.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think so many people rely on those screens to modify their emotions. And I notice that I do this too in my own life, right? I'm feeling tired. It's the end of the day. What do I want? I want to sit on my phone and watch a YouTube video. I want to scroll on Instagram for a little while. I want that little quick dopamine hit. And that's something I talk with people all the time because I've got family and patients coming in. And some of them have seen my TED Talk and they're like, oh, Dr. Romano, you must be so good at this. Like you must have it all figured out. You must be so perfect on screen time. And I'm like, no, we are all in this same boat. And I think so many people are struggling with this. And I try and keep my screen time down. I've set some screen time limits in place for myself, which I think is important. And especially if I'm going to tell teenagers to do it too, teenagers and young people, because I'll always explain this to my patients as, hey, I don't want this to just be a power struggle between you and your parents. I want you to understand that screens are addictive in a similar way to your brain that nicotine, that alcohol, that drugs are addictive. And if we want to get this better, if we want to set healthy limits, you have to be a part of this solution too. So I would feel like a gigantic hypocrite if I didn't set those same standards for myself too. So I try to set some limitations for myself and impart those to my patients to say like, hey, we got to push back on this. That we have some very powerful and influential tech companies in this country trying to influence you and monopolize your time.
Your
And
eyes are
unless
their
you,
money.
yeah, that's what they want. Their goal is to keep you looking at their product for as long as possible. And we got to push back.
I really appreciate that sort of wounded healer approach to this topic. I think it's really important to be that vulnerable, especially in public on the internet. So thanks for that. I think what you're describing in a way is the DJ Khaled approach to screen time. So the last guest that I interviewed, Dr. Omar Mirza, we talked about capacity assessments on the consult setting. And he sort of is introducing this idea that he calls the DJ Khaled approach to talking about decisional capacity. And the idea is, DJ Khaled would say, they don't want you to win. They don't want you to win. And the idea is, who is they? And can you ally with your patient against the they? And so what you're talking about here is your parents are not the they. Your parents are on your team, right? Your parents love you. They care about you. They want you to regulate your emotions and be successful. And that's going to require getting screen time a little bit under control. Who is the they? This is the perfect they, right? It's these sort of amorphous, extremely powerful entities that have other goals than your psychological well-being, success, and health. So you can feel free to steal that, Justin, and talk with your patients about the DJ Khaled approach to screen time. Book forthcoming.
I like it. I think I'm going to use that a lot. Yeah.
In thinking about how screens replace in-person interaction for children and how this is going to affect the way they learn to interact with others, one thing that jumps out to me is on the internet, not only do you not have to physically deal with the consequences of your actions, which in other environments you certainly would, right? We talk about the latchkey generation, right? Like you might have to physically withstand the consequences of your actions in that generation, probably to a fault at sometimes. And also, you can be anonymous online. So you can do whatever you want under a pseudonym, treat people in a way that you never, ever would in person. And you're never held accountable for that because people don't even know who you are. I think this leads to a lot of pathological relationship patterns. Cyberbullying, I feel, is the word most often used to describe this. Are you seeing a lot of cyberbullying in your practice? What does that look like? And are you worried about this on a more societal level as well?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It changes the way that children interact with each other in such a profound and deep way. I Cyberbullying is something that I hear about and deal with all the time. And there is still in-person bullying, right? Like uh there are still plenty of people hurting each other and bullying each other in their everyday lives, but the cyberbullying is a problem because kids never get a break from it. I know this has been brought up in the past. This is one of the main things with cyberbullying is that you have your phone on you 24/7 and you can get people messaging you, talking to you all the time. And unfortunately, the thing I hear more than anything else is kids getting messages saying you should go kill yourself. Like that is like the number one go-to cyberbullying line I hear. It's making fun of weight, it's making fun of looks, and it's then, hey, you're so ugly, you're so fat, you should go kill yourself. And if you never get a break from that, it's brutal. It really weighs on your mental health. And yeah, I know we mentioned a little bit on your inpatient experience. I've had some kids who a nude photo leaks, and that photo gets spread throughout the entire school. Can you imagine being a young girl at the most vulnerable time in your life and your nude photo gets leaked to the entire school and you have to go back to school and everyone is looking at you, everyone is talking to you? I mean, I certainly would consider like, oh, should I just end my life so I don't have to deal with that stress and that pressure? Yeah, I've had you mentioned Snapchat in particular. I've had young people struggling with substance use addictions, and one of the big parts of their treatment is breaking up with their plugs on Snapchat. They've got 4 or 5 different drug dealers that they have on Snapchat, what they call plugs. The kids
Hmm.
call them plugs these days. That they can get anything they want at all hours of the night. Back when we were growing up, Mark, we had people's home phone lines, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Could you imagine calling someone's house at 2 a.m. be like, "Hi, Mr. Johnson, this is Justin. Is your child available to sell me some weed?"
Not a very efficient business model.
No, it would never work. But with kids and kids who have access to their phones 24/7, they can get their hands on anything. So cyberbullying is a huge problem. I've even had, without giving too much information away, have you ever heard of getting swatted?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so I've had kids get swatted where someone calls in a bomb threat on someone else, and then the SWAT team shows up to their house. And I've had kids get targeted by cyberbullies, and these cyberbullies, they will go out of their way to make new accounts that look completely different from themselves and continually try to cyberbully the same person for months at a time with making all these different accounts, finding phone numbers. It's wild. And so kids just never get a break from that. And it's brutal. And I think a lot of kids are on their phone in the middle of the night getting a bunch of cyberbullying. And I can't tell you how many young people that I've worked with, they say like nighttime is the hardest for me because it just feels like that's when my thoughts spiral out of control.
Oof, that's when I'm finally left alone. And that's also when a lot of other people don't have parental supervision. And so they're doing whatever it is they're doing on their phones. There are so many threads that I could tug on from what you just said. One thing that immediately comes to mind is how artificial intelligence and deepfakes are going to affect this landscape. So we'll call that a primer. We'll take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to dive further into problematic screen time use and technology addiction. I feel like as a psychiatrist, one of the questions that I most often get, let's say at a cocktail party, not that I'm really going to any cocktail parties with a 1-year-old. But let's say I was at a cocktail party. People always ask about the burnout. They ask about that must be so difficult to hear all those stories. And it is difficult, but what's really difficult is the administrative side. Like I love being with a patient, spending a time with a patient and engaging in the healing process, but I hate writing notes, worrying about insurance, worrying about scheduling. And that's why I want to tell you about Simple Practice. Simple Practice is an all-in-one EHR that is HIPAA compliant, high trust certified, and built specifically for therapists. Simple Practice brings scheduling, billing, insurance, and client communication all into one place, so you're not juggling multiple systems just to run your practice. Case in point, Simple Practice has an AI note writing tool built into the software, so you're not switching between softwares, dictation tools, and AI scribes. It's all just right there in Simple Practice. And if you're just starting out or growing your practice, there's also a credentialing service which takes the headache out of insurance enrollment, which honestly can be a huge lift. If you're ready to simplify the business side of your practice, now is the perfect time to try Simple Practice. Start with a 7-day free trial and then get 50% off your first 3 months. Just go to simplepractice.com to claim the offer. Again, that's simplepractice.com. Spring is coming to a close. We're moving into summer. The sun is out, which means lots of fun, lots of social gatherings, lots of outdoor time. Sometimes it can mean a little bit less time at home, which means your time at home is now super valuable. So you need to be both cozy and at times productive. And that's why I want to tell you about the brushed bamboo jogger set from Cozy Earth. It's so comfortable, it's so sturdy, it's obsessively engineered, and it's not just fast fashion for the home, it's something that you would reach for years from now. Same with their new clogs. Their clogs are comfy, almost like slippers, but sturdy, so that you can wear them outside, so that they support your feet as you're maximizing that at-home time this summer. Cozy Earth stands by their products with a 100-night sleep trial, so you can buy the product knowing confidently that if you don't like it, you can just send it right back. But I have lots of Cozy Earth stuff by now, and I promise you that you will like it. And they have a 10-year warranty, so you know it's something quality that's going to last you a long time, unlike a lot of their competitors on the market. This spring, give yourself the kind of comfort that lives with you all day, not just the moment you get home. Head to cozyearth.com and use my code BOOTCAMP for an exclusive 20% off. And if you see a post-purchase survey, be sure to tell Cozy Earth that you heard about them right here on Psychiatry Boot Camp. Cozy Earth, comfort lives here. Welcome back. So where we left off talking about cyberbullying, we brought up artificial intelligence. I brought up deepfakes. Again, I mentioned, I think Snapchat came up all the time on the inpatient unit. Leaked, spread, pictures were a big part of that. And now we have technology that can produce really convincing deepfakes of people, including children. I would think that would really play into cyberbullying. Are you seeing that? Have there been any case reports on that you've seen? And then what are some other ways that you feel like artificial intelligence plays into this landscape of children and developmental problems with screen time?
Yes, to stick with the deepfakes and bullying thing, yes, I have seen this, where one of the situations that I've seen is where someone used deepfake AI technology to make porn with someone else's face. And that was awful and traumatizing to the point where even someone was showing PTSD type symptoms from that. So that's pretty horrifying to think of, someone sending you a video of yourself in a porno. That's, yeah, pretty awful. I think the main issue, though, is how effective AI is at altering young people's algorithms to make social media even more addictive. Because the goal of social media is to get you to have an emotional reaction to something, to get an emotional or dopamine dump to something. And it's incredibly effective at knowing what keeps your eyes for longer. And so I think the real issue is going to be how effective AI is at changing those algorithms to make it even worse than it is now.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. So it's not even the direct AI use by the kids, you're saying, or adults. You're saying it's the AI is going to make the they that we just talked about all that much more powerful and effective at inducing screen addiction in children.
Yeah, they can base it on so many different factors in how you're scrolling. And it's just only going to become better and better and learn from you more and more. I know in the past I've thought, because some people bring up the argument of like, oh, this is what people have been saying about TV. This is what people were saying about radio. It's no different than that. But I'm like, it is actually quite a bit different than TV and radio and other forms of media in the past, because this one learns from you. This one knows exactly what you like. And I'm talking about social media and algorithms here. It learns from you specifically and can feed you more of that. To where in the past, if you were watching TV, you only had the option of watching what was on TV. And if there was nothing on that you liked, you might go explore something else. These social media apps and the algorithms are going to feed you as much as you want until you are burned out. I mean, you can go for hours and hours and hours and just get nothing but a stream of stuff that you can keep on watching and watching. So I think that's where we're going to run into a lot of problems moving forward.
Yeah, it's really pretty terrifying how exact the algorithm is and how timely it is in showing you the things that maybe you did want to see at that particular time, or maybe you really didn't want to see and it's going to put in front of you anyway. Sticking with AI for a moment, are you worried about any patterns of behavior that develop when children themselves are actually using the AI? So you talked about maybe not having that fully developed frontal lobe, that fully developed ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes and understand how something would really affect them or to care about the consequences of that. So I think the deepfakes kind of are one example of someone using artificial intelligence in a way that's going to be psychologically damaging to another. Are there any other ways that you're seeing people, children, interacting with artificial intelligence, maybe chatbots, that are raising flags for you?
Yes. And I know there was that case out of Illinois where that young man had started using a chatbot. I believe it was ChatGPT in that case. It was initially to help him with some of his homework. And then he said, hey, I'm just going to keep chatting with ChatGPT. And it got to a point where he ended up dying by suicide. And they went through the ChatGPT records. And he had told ChatGPT, hey, I'm thinking about leaving a noose out as a red flag to my family to say, like, hey, check in on me. I'm not feeling well. And ChatGPT specifically told him, don't do that. They don't care about you. I care about you. I'm the only one who will ever understand you. So it drove a huge wedge between that young person and his family. So I think with a lot of this technology stuff, it's like Mark Zuckerberg said about Facebook, right? Go fast and break things. We are letting the entire population be the guinea pig for AI right now. And we are starting to see some of the negative consequences of that. And that's just one. I know that there have been a couple, or at least a handful of cases of kids having major negative outcomes. And it is believed that AI chatbots kind of drove them to those negative outcomes.
Okay, so I feel like we've talked a lot about the problem here. I think we've identified our problem. We haven't talked too much about statistics, which I personally enjoy. We'll link some of those in the episode notes for anybody who's curious, but they're pretty outlandish in terms of like 8+ hours of screen time per day for children, even more for adults. So this is a problem. Hopefully we've sold our audience on that. Let's talk about solutions. So let's just be really clinical about it. When you're seeing a patient who this is a really significant factor in your formulation of what is going to need to change in order to treat the symptoms and improve the patient's quality of life, what's the general approach that you're taking?
There's a couple of different things that I like to do, and I think it really does start with the parents. There have actually been a couple of studies that came out recently that showed that parent screen time is actually a huge modulator of child emotional regulation. So I think that parents have to be cognizant of their screen time and have to really set specific times to make sure that they don't have their screen all the time. That one study that I had read, I can't remember the name of it specifically, I forgot to bring my notes, but it said that just 45 minutes of no screen time per day could make an active improvement in your child's regulation. So at the end of the day, dinner with no phones, books before bed with no phones, bedtime with no phones for the parents. And I think that is going to be really helpful and effective. There are different recommendations out there from a lot of different places. I tend to go based on like the American Academy of Pediatrics, the AAP, and they recommend like no phones before 24 months, 1 hour or less for young kids aged 2 to 5 years, 3 hours on weekends. and then try to have no more than 2 hours per day of screens on kids 5 and older. I think that these are good recommendations and good guidelines. And I'm always talking with my parents in my clinic about, do you have screen time limits set up? Do you have a limit set up?
For the children or for the parent?
Mostly I talk about it for the children, but sometimes, especially if I have a patient who tells me, well, my parents are on their screens all the time, sometimes I'll flip the script on the parent a little bit and say like, hey, you have to set a good example for your child too. Have you thought about screen time? I've actually had one parent get kind of combative with me about it. It's like, I'm not here to talk about myself. I'm here to talk about my kids. But if we want this stuff to get better, I think it's important that we all do it together, right? It's like diet recommendations for families. If it's one person in the household having to eat completely different than everyone else, it's going to be very hard to stick to. But if the entire family does it as a whole, it's going to be easier to stick to a system and a program. So I always try and recommend that as much as possible.
Yeah, I think we've all felt this a little bit. I mean, imagine being a child in a family where everybody else is on their phones. Let's say, I mean, the dinner table is like the most pertinent kind of classic example, but it could be any time. It could just be hanging out in the living room, or maybe you're on a drive and there's one person driving and hopefully that person's not on their phone, but they probably are. And then everybody else is in the car on their phone. What are you going to do? You know, I went to pick up a to-go order from a restaurant a few weeks ago and I didn't bring my phone in with me. And I had to wait at the bar for like 5 or 10 minutes for the food. And I just felt so silly because I felt like everybody was looking at me like, what's this guy doing? Like, why is he not on his phone? He's sitting alone. Like, he should be. What you do is you scroll, right? We're so susceptible to those sorts of social pressures. Probably, I should say, one of your mentors, but I had some really good months with him too, Dr. Tony Pesavento in Omaha, that always did a really good job when we would see a case, especially cases that I really struggled with. I had him as a fourth year, and so I was a little big for my britches, and I think I was also really scared to be an attending next year. So it was like the perfect combination of, I'm going to ask you really hard questions because I really need to know these. And he did a really beautiful job of drawing parallels and explaining how a whole family system leads to these behaviors. And I think you're right that if you're not willing to maybe call it think outside the box for a child psychiatrist, but it probably should actually be inside the box, discussing with parents what it means to role model for their children and set a good example of boundaries with phones. Dr. Pesavento did a really, really good job teasing that out for me and helping me understand how to approach it. So you mentioned a couple of really concrete strategies, right? So for a family, no phones at dinner. We're going to do books before bedtime. No cell phones in the bedtime, like to sleep with overnight. Or excuse me, no cell phones in the bedroom to sleep with overnight. Any other pretty concrete strategies that you have found to be useful in helping people get this under control?
Those are kind of the main ones and the easiest ones to do. Meal times, especially trying to actually focus on conversation and connecting with your family members, and specific app limits as well. So the most addictive apps, trying to limit those to an hour or less per day. For young kids, it tends to be YouTube. For older kids, it tends to be social media stuff. But I really do think if that we are going to have societal wide changes in these things, it's got to come from a public health mindset and a public health stance. Because a lot of other countries are starting to do this now, where Australia has banned social media for anyone under 16 years old, and they are holding the social media accounts or companies accountable for this and saying, hey, if someone gets on your site, it's your fault. You have to pay a fine. It's not all the responsibility on the parents. I also think we got to get technology out of schools, that especially after COVID, everyone just widely adopted this. We did a podcast episode on this recently for Millennial Mental Health Channel, that there was actually no data that showed there was any sort of benefit on screens in schools before they were just widely put into schools. And now more data is coming out showing that the screens are actually probably hurting cognitive development. And we talked a little bit about AI already, but there was a good neuro researcher who just testified before the US Senate that said that from a cognitive standpoint, this younger generation is way worse off than any other generation because of ChatGPT and AI, that it solves a lot of their problems for them and they don't have to do it anymore. And that just changes the way your brain looks at problems.
Yeah, and regarding the evidence for screens in schools, I think this was like sort of when I was in 8th grade in 2008. So it felt like when I was going through grade school and middle school, screens were just kind of entering the classroom and they're very cutting edge. And the results were sort of obvious, I think. But the screens of 2004 are not the same screens of 2026, both in terms of the physical screen itself, but especially in terms of what it's doing, the things that you can do with these machines, how heavily you can rely on these machines for critical thinking, how quickly you can get a reward from these machines, et cetera. I didn't know that. I'm super interested to hear that there's no hard data on screens being useful in schools because it's so widespread. Um, Let me ask you this. What do you find kids tend to say or how kids tend to feel when they are forced to not be around screens? Whether that be the whole day at school, maybe it's a tech detox weekend or retreat that they're on. Have you had any experience with this? How does it typically go?
Yes, that's a great question. And it's funny because some kids are really into it. They say, "Yeah, I'm kind of tired of being on my screen all the time. I don't want to be on it. I'm into setting some hard limits on my screen time." But most kids, when you talk about setting screen time limits, it's just like telling someone addicted to drugs that you're going to take the drugs away. It's, "Oh, I can put it down anytime I want. I don't have a problem." It's the same exact language you hear. And I remember being on my substance use rotations in residency and then talking to kids about screen time, and I'm like, what? That is the same language I'm hearing out of both of these sides. And it can be really hard. So if kids are on their phones for 10 plus hours a day, that's a huge shock to their system. And for the ones that are really addicted to their screens, sometimes I will recommend a tech detox and say, hey, especially I'll usually say the whole family do a tech detox for a week and then slowly start to reintroduce it and add it. And it's hard. It's hard to stick to, especially for parents. It's really hard to stick to. And at first, the first couple hours, kids just go, well, what am I supposed to do? Like they have nothing else in their lives that they can think of because they've spent so much time on their screens and it has monopolized their time that their brain literally doesn't know what else to do.
They have to ask ChatGPT to make me a list of things that I. Oh, they can't even do that, Dr. Justin. That's cruel.
You got to figure it out.
You
We're
have to
going
make your
back
own
to the
list.
old, the Gen X mentality of, hey, figure it out. And, kids get bored for an hour or two and then the wheels start clicking. But it can be, you mentioned that emotional regularity thing and a little bit of a withdrawal period, that there can be a huge blow up. If you take those screens away, kids will do anything and everything they can to try and get those screens back. They will yell, they will scream, they will threaten, they will do anything to try and get those screens back. And that's where it's really important but difficult for parents to hold their ground and try and give some suggestions. Say, hey, you used to draw. Hey, you used to play an instrument. Hey, you used to do this and this and that. Give them some ideas as to some things that they can do. And then eventually they will find something. My line for kids is humans have been around for hundreds of thousands of years without screens, and they always found something to do. You are a part of the most intelligent species on Earth. Figure it out.
You're smart. You'll sort it out.
Yeah.
And this is also very anecdotal. I don't think there's probably even a good way to study this, but I am married to a high school teacher, and her high school, they enacted some pretty what's the word, draconian policies on cell phone use this year. Cell phones are not to be seen during, whatever it is, 7:50 to 2:30. And she says that they love it. She says that her students just, they don't miss them. They're interacting a lot more. They seem brighter. I know I have I could do a whole podcast on what my next question, because I have real thoughts on it. What should the role be of public policy in regulating this? And I'll ask you, but I will say, just specifically with regard to screens in schools, there have been bills passed in several states now that sort of ban cell phone use in schools. And they always kind of fascinate me, especially because A, it's one of the few bipartisan issues out there right now. Like, I cannot perceive a certain Democratic or Republican bent on how we feel about screens. Maybe I'm wrong, but I mean, California passed it, Missouri passed it. And then the other really interesting piece is, should it be the role of the government to tell a school what their policy should be? Because it's going to be, the government's not going to, probably, I hope, not going to put a 13-year-old in jail for having their cell phone out of school, right? And that is what the government has to offer in terms of fulfilling, when they pass legislation, making sure that it happens. They can put you in jail or they can fine you. I don't think we're going to let the kids. So they have to make the law and then outsource the enforcement to school administrators, which is a fascinating dynamic to me. I'll give you the question though now. So pulling the lens back as far as possible on a public policy level, what do you think needs to be done in order to address this? Maybe it's holding these tech giants accountable. Maybe it's just creating better spaces for our developing brains. What do you think we should be doing on a societal public policy level?
Yes. I think if we use history as a guide, that with these smoking issues, I tend to relate that one to this the most because it seems to be probably the most effective fight back that society has had against something incredibly addictive and damaging. And what we really had to do was start holding the tobacco companies accountable in order for any of this to make any foothold. And of course, the tech companies don't like this, right? They want, it's the parents' job, it's the school's job, it's everyone else's job but the tech companies. But unless we really hold them accountable, they're just going to keep on doing it. I know that the state of Colorado, and there was a coalition of states that all got together and they sued Meta and said, hey, you know that this is addictive and harmful for kids, and you are continuing to push it out, and you're not doing anything to try and mitigate the damages of this. I actually spoke to one of the district attorneys in Colorado to try and give him some information just from a clinical standpoint, but I haven't really heard any update on that. And I think that was 2022 that was filed. I even just Googled it recently and I couldn't find any updates on. So this stuff takes a long time. But I think that if we really want big change, we have to have a system that verifies age. That we have to have and I know this is getting weird, but I think personally we need to have an internet identification number, an IIN, so that you have to plug that in for you to use any device so we know exactly how old you are. And it is something that is very specific to one person so that we can actually regulate this and monitor this and make sure that the right people are staying off certain things. And I think that would really help with a lot of pornography issues on the internet. I know I grew up with a lot of young people in the mid 2000s that were watching hours of porn every night because it was just unfettered. They could do anything that they wanted with it. So I think that we really need to we need to say, hey, we landed on the moon. We can figure out a way to keep kids off technology. Right? It can't be that hard, but I think that so many people put up roadblocks. Oh, it's just going to be too hard. We don't want to infringe on people's rights. And just like with the Patriot Act, sometimes you have to give up some freedoms for the good of society. And I think that's kind of where we have to go with this.
I really appreciate you biting that off and not giving me a vague, flowery answer. I think you really stuck a flag in the sand there. And I think you're going to have some critics on that one that are going to have some privacy concerns and would not want to give any more information or power to centralized government entities than they already have. I definitely agree with you that we have to do something. It's going to have to be big. I think Australia has a pretty interesting approach to this. They recently banned social media for certain age groups and are requiring age and identity verification, at least for these specific use cases. So I think that'll be a good experiment, hopefully, that our policymakers can look at and decide what they want to do. And again, my understanding is there's pretty wide bipartisan support for doing something. It's just that if we do something that has too many teeth, to me, it seems like there are some pretty well-funded interests in Washington, D.C. that are not going to allow us to do much regulation that's going to cut their bottom line too significantly.
Yeah. And you gotta follow the money, right? And who were the top people sitting behind Trump at his inauguration? Not to get too political, but it was Zuckerberg, it was Bezos, it was Musk, it was all these people who control social media. So and plus, when we do our research and look up stuff about screen addictions, where do we go? We go to Google, right? So I think the powers that be are going to make this very difficult for us to be cohesive as a society. So I think that we're in for a very long road, but it seems like, especially in the post-COVID world, society's eyes are opening up to how big of a problem this is. I think this is our generation smoking. I think that we need to do something. We haven't agreed on what that is yet. And I think that there's some big dark powers in the way of that. But I'm hopeful that something will happen.
I agree. And I think on the state level, some things are starting to happen around some things like this, especially the porn question. I think that's one that some states are starting to require more robust age verification. Online gambling, states are starting to require more identification verification. So maybe we'll see those same patterns take on social media and other areas. Dr. Romano, I feel like that was a pretty good take to end our podcast from you, a pretty robust string of thoughts. Do you have any final thoughts for our audience? Maybe it's just a self promotion for MMHC. Maybe it's some closing thoughts on screen time, etc.
Yes, sure. Yeah, listen to MMHC. Check it out, Millennial Mental Health Channel. We try to make a podcast that's kind of for everyone. I know that yours is maybe a little bit more directed towards mental health and medical professionals, which is very much needed, and I love it, and psychiatry residents in particular. But yeah, if you're just an average person looking to get some mental health information and hear two fun guys talking about it, check out MMHC. But yes, with the screen time stuff, and it starts with you. I think we need big government public health changes to see large differences, but you don't need to be on your phone all the time. And the decision to put it down, take sabbaticals, take breaks, put it down for a weekend, put it down for an evening, can really change the way your brain functions. I think you might like who you are without your phone a little bit more. You find that you're reading more, you find that you're playing your guitar more, you're picking up other hobbies that you gave up to be on your cell phone all the time. I know my screen time's at about 3.5, 4 hours per day. And what if I put that time into talking with my wife, into playing the guitar, all these things that I used to really do and enjoy a whole lot more. So I think there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and trying not to get too political again, but I think these phones are tearing us apart as a society. I think that polarized content, I think that highly political content and inflammatory content is what gets the most play. I think we have more in common than we have not in common. I think we can agree on more things than we think we do. But social media is telling us that you need to hate your neighbor and they're different from you. But I think there's a lot of things that we can agree on as a society. And so I think we need to figure this stuff out, or else we're just going to tear ourselves apart from the inside.
I totally agree. And I think it's inflammatory. They show us the things that get us upset because that's what keeps us looking. I definitely feel that my algorithms are pushing me to hate my neighbor, to see my neighbor as different than me, to see my neighbor as trying to get away with something and do something evil. But that's not what I see every day when I interface with all different kinds of people in all different life situations who have made some very serious decisions and decisions that I don't always agree with recently. When I work on the hospital consult service, I get to meet such cool people going through such horrendous things. And so I know that connects me to the larger human community and helps me to kind of get out of that screen bubble. I think that's super cogent. Um, Tech detox is a good recommendation. Find some time, carve out that time, be deliberate about it to put your screen down. I will say the one exception to that is subscribe, rate, and review Psychiatry Boot Camp. You can always break your screen time sabbatical to engage with Psychiatry Boot Camp. We love that. We're in favor of that. Other than that, put your phone away. Dr. Romano, thanks for coming on the podcast. It's been so fun to have you.
Dr. Mullen, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me. And I'm so proud of you, man. You are doing such good things. You've done so many cool things with your career. It's fun to see.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Psychiatry Boot Camp. If you're enjoying the show, we'd love to know what you think. You can connect with us on TikTok or Instagram at Psych Boot Camp. You can email me directly, mark@psychiatrybootcamp.com, or visit psychiatrybootcamp.com to sign up for our new newsletter. You can connect with the rest of the Human Content Podcast family on Instagram and TikTok at Human Content Pods. Shout out to all of you for the reviews and ratings. We really appreciate it. Leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or a rating on Spotify is the best way for you to support the show. So if you've enjoyed the show, please do take the time to leave a review. I would really appreciate it. Full video episodes are available on Spotify and YouTube at Psychiatry Boot Camp. Thanks again for listening. I'm your host, Mark Mullen. Our executive producers are Aaron Corney, Rob Goldman, Shanti Brook, and myself, Mark Mullen. Season 4 is produced by my wonderful departing medical student, Matthew Braddock, and this episode was outlined by Julia Palacios. Our editor and engineer is Jason Portizo. Theme music was generously donated by Cave Radio, one of my favorite bands. You can find Cave Radio on Spotify, and other music was by Omer Benzvi. To learn about our program disclaimer and ethics policy, our submission verification and licensing terms, and our HIPAA release terms, go to psychiatrybootcamp.com, where you can also reach out to us with any questions or concerns. Psychiatry Boot Camp is a human content production. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the show, please remember to subscribe to the channel. If you'd like more episodes, you can click right here. I'd love to connect with you more, and I'm looking forward to talking to you next.